Hey everyone, welcome to another deep dive.
Yeah.
Today we're going to be looking at something pretty interesting.
Yeah.
It's about how racial and ethnic identity kind of plays out
Yeah.
in Mexican white relationships.
Uh-huh.
Um, and we're going to be going pretty deep on this one.
Yeah.
We're going to be using Jennifer Cassandra Gillen's
Right.
research for this.
Yes.
And I think it's really interesting because it kind of goes beyond just like
Yes.
the surface level stuff.
Yeah.
You know, it really gets into how couples are
Right.
navigating these complex dynamics.
Right.
So
Jennifer's thesis is called Navigating Racial and Ethnic Identities in Mexican White Relationships, a case study.
wow, that's a mouthful.
It is. It is, but it's not just some like theoretical,
Right.
dry academic paper.
Right.
She actually interviewed 20 couples in Brazos County, Texas,
Wow.
and got both partners' perspectives.
Interesting.
So, we're hearing from both sides of the relationship.
Right.
And that gives us, I think, a much richer understanding of, how these identities are kind of lived and negotiated within these relationships.
Yeah. And one of the things that's so interesting is that right away, Gillen's research shows that Mexican self-identification is not straightforward at all.
Absolutely.
It's not just checking a box.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
It's way more than that.
Absolutely. So, she found that people use all sorts of terms, Mexican American, Hispanic, Latinos.
Yeah.
But they all meant different things to different people depending on their experience.
Right.
So like Fernando, who grew up in the Rio Grande Valley, for him, Mexican is a super strong identity, but he rejects Hispanic or Latino.
Right.
He's like, those aren't me.
Yeah, I was like, those are inaccurate.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They just don't represent his experience.
And you can hear that.
Yeah.
You could hear that in his words.
You can hear that passion.
It's just like, no.
Yeah.
Those are not for me.
This is who I am.
Yeah.
Mexican.
Yep, it.
Yeah. But then you have Victoria, who grew up in like a mostly Mexican neighborhood in San Antonio.
Okay.
So for her, Mexican is kind of just like the default, you know, like everyone around her was Mexican.
Yeah, so she's just like,
well, yeah,
I'm Mexican.
Right.
That's just what I am.
Right. And it's interesting though, right?
Yeah.
How the same word can mean such different things to different people.
That's super interesting.
Even within the same broad ethnic group,
right?
You know?
Yeah.
And then we have Erica, who's a little different.
Okay.
She only heard the term Hispanic after she moved to the U.S.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So she's coming from somewhere else.
She's coming from Mexico.
Okay.
And she's like, Hispanic. What's that?
What is that?
This is a totally gringo thing.
Right. Like she doesn't...
She finds it confusing. It doesn't resonate with her at all.
Yeah. So I think this just really shows us that context is...
Context is huge.
Everything.
It's everything.
You know, when it comes to identity.
When we're talking about identity, it's not just about these interchangeable terms, right?
Yeah.
These terms represent complex lived experiences. Yeah. They're deeply personal. And it makes you think, like, who has the power?
Yeah, that's a good point.
To define these categories.
Yeah, who gets to decide.
And impose them on other people.
Yeah, and I think that's where things start to get a little...
That's where it gets tricky.
Yeah, a little tricky. Because we see in the research that white partners often default to Hispanic when they're talking about Mexican partners.
Right.
Even when those partners...
Because even if their partner doesn't identify that way.
Yeah.
They're just like, oh, yeah, my Hispanic partner.
Yeah,
right.
Exactly.
And you're kind of like, whoa.
Yeah. Hold on. That's interesting.
Let's unpack that.
It speaks volumes about the power dynamics at play here.
Right. You know? Like, it's almost like the white partners are sometimes unintentionally. Unintentionally fitting their Mexican partners into these pre-existing boxes.
Yeah, these pre-existing categories that don't really...
That might not feel authentic or representative.
Right. It's like they're trying to put a square peg in a round hole.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, for example, we have Sean, who describes his wife, Sophia, as pretty much white.
And she's Mexican.
Because she doesn't fit his idea of what a Mexican person should be like.
Right.
So he's kind of like overlooking her heritage.
Right.
Just because she doesn't fit that stereotype.
That stereotype in his head.
Right.
It's so interesting.
Yeah, and it's a good example of how these cultural assumptions and biases, even the unconscious ones, can really creep into these relationships.
Yeah, for sure.
And sometimes those assumptions show up in ways that seem harmless, like with Cristobal's partner, Lori.
Okay.
She just assumed he'd be a good dancer.
Just because he's...
Because he's Hispanic.
Hispanic. So it's like even
the positive stereotypes can still be kind of limiting, you know?
They can still be... They can still kind of reduce...
They reduce people down.
For just one dimension.
Yeah, exactly.
But it's also important to remember that for some Mexican partners... using Hispanic is a choice. Like they decide to use that label. So for example, Mateo found it was just easier to say Hispanic, especially when he was talking to his partner, Aaron.
Okay.
So it's like...
So it's more about just fitting in.
It's more about navigating those social expectations.
Than it is about like a deep personal identification.
Right. It's just like... This is easier.
This is easier.
I don't have to explain myself.
I don't have to.
This is just what it is.
Have a whole conversation about it.
This is fine.
Right.
And then you have someone like Irene. Who really pushes back. Against that Hispanic label.
She's like, no way.
Yeah, she's like...
I'm Mexican.
Yeah, I'm Mexican.
And Hispanic is someone who...
And Hispanic is like...
looks the part.
Yeah, they look the part, but they're not really.
But isn't really connected
to the culture.
To the culture, right. Yeah. So she's drawing a really clear distinction between how she sees herself and this external label.
And how other people are trying to define her.
Exactly.
So it's like this tension between...
There's a tension there, for sure.
For sure.
Between self-identification and how other people see you.
Right, and how other people perceive you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think all of these experiences really highlight how fluid and complex Mexican identity is.
Right. It's not
one size fits all.
Yeah, one size fits all.
At all.
You know, it's shaped by individual experience.
Individual experiences, family history, and even the dynamics within their relationships.
Right.
You know?
Totally.
So I think that's a key takeaway for our listeners. We need to understand these nuances.
Right.
So that we can move beyond these simplistic labels and really appreciate the rich tapestry of experiences within the Mexican community. Right.
Yeah.
Oh, totally.
It's about seeing the individual.
The individual.
Yeah, not the...
Yeah, the category.
The category. Yeah.
For sure. Now let's shift gears a little bit and talk about the white partners in these relationships.
Okay.
And what's interesting here is that their own racial identity stays the same.
Okay.
Like they're still identifying as white.
Okay.
But their relationships with their Mexican partners really change how they understand race.
Interesting.
Like it impacts their lives in a really profound way.
So they're kind of like seeing the world.
They're stepping outside their own bubble and seeing things from a different perspective.
Yeah, it's like they're getting a new lens.
Exactly. Like Jacob, for instance. He never really thought about why people were staring at him and his partner Veronica until she pointed it out.
Oh, wow.
Like, she was like, people are staring at us. Yeah.
Because I'm Mexican.
Wow.
And he was like, oh.
I never even noticed.
You know, like it was a total wake-up call for him.
Wow. So it was like he was just oblivious to it.
Totally oblivious to this whole racial dynamic.
Right. And then suddenly he's like, and then
bam.
Oh, wow.
It's right there.
He was just
in his face.
Yeah.
And for some people, it wasn't just like a passive awareness.
Right.
Like Zach, he would get so angry at the way people would look at him and his partner Mariana.
Wow.
Like he would get more upset than she would.
So he's like taking it personally.
He's taking it personally. He's like experiencing the injustice secondhand.
Right.
But it's almost like he's more sensitive to it because it's happening.
Yeah, because
to someone he loves.
Yeah, to someone he, you know.
That's so interesting.
Yeah, and then there's James who makes this really insightful point about privilege.
Okay.
He realizes that he can choose whether or not to engage with these instances of prejudice, you know?
Right.
But his partner can't.
Wow.
Like, she doesn't
she doesn't
have that option.
Yeah, that choice.
She can't just opt out.
Right. She can't just be like, oh, I'm just going to
I'm going to
ignore that. This isn't happening.
Yeah.
And that's such a powerful point.
Yeah.
Because it shows you how these inequalities are baked into.
Yeah, baked into the system.
The system.
Yeah.
It's not just about.
Right. It's not just about
personal feelings.
Yeah.
It's about these systems.
Yeah. These systems that are
limiting people's choices.
Yeah.
Right. And their
opportunities.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's really interesting to see how these relationships can actually push the white partners to change.
Okay.
Like Megan.
Okay.
Her relationship with Climby was like a turning point.
Okay.
She started to question her own whiteness.
Interesting.
And how it contributes to these racial disparities.
Wow.
You know?
Yeah.
Like she really went from being unaware to becoming a passionate advocate.
Wow, that's amazing.
For social justice.
That's incredible.
She even changed her career to align with that.
Yes.
You know?
That's so inspiring.
Yeah.
I love that.
That's like the power of these personal relationships. To challenge these deep-seated beliefs.
Deep-seated beliefs.
And inspire action.
And
we see that in Mark's story, too.
Okay.
He saw racial profiling happening to his partner, Judith.
Wow.
And it forced him to really confront his own privilege as a white male and the realities of racial discrimination.
Wow. So it's like these relationships are like
they're like a crash course.
Yeah, a crash course.
It's on racial dynamics, you know?
Like they're no longer...
Yeah, they're not just observers anymore.
Right, they're like...
They're in it. They're implicated.
Yeah, they're implicated.
Their partner's experience.
You know?
Yeah.
And that realization can be unsettling.
Right, for sure. Because you're like...
But it can also be empowering. Because it can lead to a deeper understanding.
A deeper understanding.
Every cycle, a commitment.
Yeah. To making things better.
You
know.
So it's not about changing their racial identity.
Right.
Right? They're still white.
But it's about
changing their perspective.
On race.
Right, and their role.
Right, and their role. Addressing these inequalities. And it really highlights how transformative these relationships can be.
These relationships can be,
Yeah, like they can really open people's eyes. And hearts to a whole new way. Of seeing
the world.
What stands out to you.
About these transformations.
Yeah.
I think it's just remarkable how these relationships can lead to such a profound shift in awareness.
You
know?
Yeah.
And it's not just about like, oh yeah, I get it now.
It's not just about acknowledging the problem.
Right. It's about
taking action.
Like
Megan did.
You
know?
Yeah.
She became an ally. In the fight
for racial justice. And that's what we need more of.
We need more of that.
You know? It shows that change can happen at the individual level. You know?
Yeah.
It starts with open dialogue, shared experiences, and a willingness to challenge.
Our own perspectives.
And these stories are a powerful reminder that we all have a role to play. In dismantling racism. And creating a more inclusive society.
Totally. Wow. So we've really gotten into some deep stuff here.
We've covered a lot of ground.
About Mexican identity.
Yeah, we've talked about how these relationships really impact both partners. And I think one of the biggest takeaways for me is that there's no such thing as a single Mexican experience.
There's no monolith.
It's not a monolith. It's about recognizing the individual. Within the group.
Yeah, and everyone's
background is different.
Yeah, and their family history.
Where they grew up.
Even.
All of that.
Yeah.
Shapes
how they see themselves.
And it really underscores the importance of respecting individual preferences when it comes to labels.
Like instead of assuming.
Instead of just assuming.
We should be asking.
Yeah, how do you identify?
And actually listening.
I'm really listening to the answer. It's about honoring that diversity. Instead of trying to instead of fit everyone into these neat little boxes.
Yeah.
And we also talked about those power dynamics. That come up in these relationships. Especially when you have one partner who's white and one who's Mexican. And we saw how white partners often default to Hispanic.
To Hispanic. Even when their partner's dumb.
The partner doesn't use that term.
Doesn't use that term, yeah.
And that reveals a subtle but important
power imbalance.
Power imbalance, yeah. It's like
they're saying,
I get to decide.
Yeah, I get to decide.
How you're categorized.
How you're categorized.
Even if you don't agree with it.
Even if you don't agree with it.
And so I think it's really important to have open communication.
Communication.
In these relationships.
And to be willing.
Yeah, to be willing
to challenge our own assumptions.
Our own assumptions.
Yeah.
Right.
Even when we think.
Yeah, even when we think.
Being well-intentioned.
Well-intentioned. I'm just trying to help.
Right.
Yeah.
We could actually be perpetuating
harmful stereotypes.
Harmful stereotypes, yeah.
Or invalidating.
Or invalidating someone's lived experience.
Lived experience, yeah. And I think it's been really inspiring.
Yeah.
To see how the white partners in this study
have really stepped up.
They've stepped up and confronted
their own privilege.
They're
trying to see the world.
Yeah, they're trying
to see their partner's eyes.
See it through their partner's eyes.
And they're actively working.
Against racism.
And that's what gives me hope.
What gives me hope.
You know?
Yeah.
It shows that
personal
relationships can be a catalyst.
They can be a catalyst, yeah.
For real change.
Not
just for the individuals involved, but for society as a whole.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, as we wrap up here, I'm left wondering, how do these larger structures, these power dynamics, really shape how we understand?
Yeah, how we understand.
Race and ethnicity.
It's a huge question.
A big question.
Yeah.
But it's one we all need to be thinking about.
Yeah.
Because these conversations are so important.
They are so important.
And they're not going away.
You're not going away.
Yeah.
We all have a role to play.
In
creating.
A
more just.
and equitable world.
So
thanks for joining us.
Yeah. Thanks for joining us.
On this deep dive. We hope it's given you some food for thought.
Yeah.
And that you'll keep exploring.
Yeah, keep exploring
these important issues.
With us.
Yeah.